I was with my 2 college friends doing a weekend camping trip in the woods near us. I'll use different names for their privacy, so I'll call them Ryan and Jamie. Ryan and I aren't experienced in outdoor activities, so it was Jamie leading us through it all. He had a small spot by the river that he led us to. It was a couple miles through the woods, but there was a huge field just on the edge of the river that we would set up camp at. When we got there, nobody else was there. We set everything up right in the middle of the field, between the woods and the river, then brought out the beers and sat around a campfire. A little while after getting there, I happened to see some people out by the tree line. They looked like hunters, having dirty clothes and backpacks, like they were blending into the woods, but I didn't see any rifles. They were pretty far though, so maybe I just couldn't see them. I pointed them out to my friends, but Jamie had a puzzled look. He said hunting in these woods was illegal, and it wasn't even hunting season anyway. He seemed really concerned that they were out here. Ryan joked that he was taking it too seriously, and we went back to our random conversations. A few more hours later, we agreed to call it a night. The sun had been down for a while at this point, and the hike had really worn us out. We all went into our tents, but not being used to it, I found it really hard to fall asleep. Something about being out in the open, in a tiny tent, and laying on a thin blow-up mattress just had me feeling off. I must have laid there for a whole 2 hours, and at that point, I was just hoping I could at least get a few hours of sleep. But then something instantly made me wide awake. Footsteps coming toward our tents. At first I thought it had to be Ryan or Jamie, probably coming back from using the bathroom, but I swear I would have heard them unzipping their tent and walking out. Only a few seconds later though, I realized there were more than just one set of footsteps. There were 2 or 3, maybe even more, all walking in a line. I looked at the thin wall of my tent, thinking I should be able to see their lights coming toward us, but there weren't any lights at all. Surely whoever was out there had to have seen our tents set up in the middle of an open field, and nobody in their right mind would just walk past us like this. I didn't know what to do though. I just pretended to be asleep, quietly listening to them getting closer. The line of people came probably just a few feet from us, walking right past our tents. As soon as they were far enough away, I quietly unzipped my tent and looked out. Just when I did, Ryan unzipped his tent too. We both looked at each other with alarmed faces, then looked out at the group. They were barely visible, but definitely still walking away. I slipped out of my tent and opened Jamie's, waking him up. Both of us explained what happened, and surprisingly, he seemed even more horrified than either of us, likely because he'd been camping plenty of times and knew how odd this was. We started packing up our stuff, feeling way too uneasy to stay the rest of the night. While packing, Jamie suddenly told us with a shaky voice to hurry. We looked up at him, then followed his gaze. In the tree line, the group of what now looks like 5 or 6 people were standing and looking over at us. My adrenaline was pumping now, and I shoved everything into my bag, and we all sprinted for the trail. We left our lights off to hopefully not be seen, so the rest of the walk, we were barely able to see anything. Luckily, we made it back, but what that group is doing out there is unknown. Based on everything, though, I don't think our encounter with them was any sort of accident. The This was a long time ago, when I was 13. It was summer. I spent pretty much all day playing on my PS3 or watching whatever was on TV. Sometimes I'd go outside or hang with some friends, but it was raining this day, so I was hunkered down inside. My dad always worked until 10, and my mom was a nurse, so her schedule was all over the place. Most of this day, I was playing on the PS3, but around 7-ish, I went to the kitchen to make food. While I was in there, a knock came at the front door. I didn't really want to answer, and as a kid, I was always nervous when someone was at the door. So I waited a minute and tried to just be quiet until they left. After they knocked several more times though, I snuck over to the door and looked out the peephole to see if maybe it was a neighbor or someone else I knew. I was really confused though, and kind of alarmed to see a police officer. He was standing on our porch, looking around and waiting for me to answer, and now I felt like I had to. I opened the door. It was still cold and rainy outside, and the officer was drenched. Being a kid, my eyes were immediately drawn toward the gun on his hip, and overall, I just felt scared, or like I was in trouble. He asked my name, then reassured me that everything was okay, and I didn't have anything to worry about. He then smiled, as if trying to keep me calm, but his teeth were noticeably rotting and yellow, which then got me to notice how overall unkempt he looked. Like, usually cops were well put together, so this was really off-putting. He definitely noticed my hesitation though, because he tried to speed up the conversation, saying he needed to search the home. I was terrified and confused, but I knew something was wrong, and that's when I noticed that there was no police car by my house. Especially with it raining, all these red flags piled up. And just as he was starting to step forward, I'd slammed the door and locked it. He didn't even try to say anything else. He immediately slammed something against the door, hard enough to shake the entire door and push me back a little. Thinking the door would give out, I ran to the home phone and dialed 911. I was freaking out so much, I'm surprised the operator even understood a word I said. The guy outside didn't give up the whole time though, and was even there still, banging on the door when the actual police showed up. I heard him trying to convince them he was a real cop, but obviously that didn't go well. He was taken in, and initially my parents didn't tell me much about the charges, probably for my own safety. But a few years later, they told me that during the interrogation, the man admitted to attempting to kidnap me. Had I been any more trusting, I don't know where I'd be right now. I work at a gas station. I'd been there for several years, and this night was one that I assumed would be like all the rest. I came in at 8 and took over for the day worker, who went home right away. The first couple hours went by quickly, as there were still customers coming in regularly to buy a few things or to pay for gas with cash. Between 11 and 12, it slowed down to where it began feeling like the shift was dragging on. I kept myself busy for another hour, or at least tried to, with stocking whatever I could find. But then I was left with the dreaded second half of my shift. It was always slow, boring, and just not enjoyable. Around 1 though, a car pulled in and parked in the spaces by the entrance door. A few other cars had come through recently, but just to get gas real quick. Very rarely would someone actually park in the spots and come into the store this late into the night. I stood up straight and tried to rub the tired look off my face, expecting them to come in. A couple minutes went by though, and they didn't. I leaned over the counter and looked out the glass door, but couldn't really see anything. The reflections on the door were blocking any way for me to see inside their car. Maybe they were just taking a break from a long drive. I didn't bother caring too much about it. I sat back and pulled on my phone. I spaced out, reading through random articles and whatnot for probably 20 or so minutes. During that time, I never heard anything or saw anything. But eventually I looked up from my phone. My heart almost stopped. There was a guy inside the store, standing in one of the aisles and looking right at me. His eyes darted away as soon as I saw him. This guy looked like he was mid-40, with a dark jacket on and a scruffy beard. I never saw or heard him enter, so how the hell did he get in? While my mind was racing, I just watched as the man kept walking around, glancing over at me a few times to see if I was looking, like he was planning to do something as soon as I looked away. Then after just 30 seconds, he suddenly hurried toward the front door and ran outside. I got up and ran to look out. This was when I noticed the car was still there, but the guy walked right past it and just out to the road until I could no longer see him. I immediately went to the cameras to see how he got in and figure out what was going on. It only took me a minute to find the footage of him slowly and quietly getting out of the car, then going to the back of the gas station. There were no cameras back there, but those doors were never locked since the gas station was technically always open anyway. What's really odd is that there were 15 minutes between the time he went around to the back to the time he walked out onto the sales floor. Police came to help me investigate, ultimately finding the car he left to have been a stolen vehicle from months ago. They didn't know anything about the guy or his motives. Sneaking around though, he clearly had something else intended for that night. And I think I was really lucky that for one reason or another, he decided not to go through with it. I was off of work this night and relaxing at home. My roommate was out of town for a couple of days visiting his parents, and I was somewhat of a night owl, so I enjoyed staying up late. It was around 12 and I was sipping on a beer while watching TV when a faint sound came from above me. At first I didn't even process it, like my body just ignored it. But after a few seconds, it kind of hit me as I realized it couldn't have been my roommate like it usually would have been. I looked up at the ceiling and muted the TV to try and listen for it again. A few seconds went by and there was nothing. The sound was so soft though, and with the TV being on when I heard it, I really had no idea what it could have been or even where upstairs it came from. Although this sounds pretty dumb of me, I really didn't feel like getting up and wasn't worried enough about it to feel the need to check it out. I opened the mini fridge I had next to the couch and grabbed another beer, cracking it open and taking a few sips to get back to relaxing. But before I could even unmute the TV, I heard that same thump sound above me. I looked back up at the ceiling, and after a moment, I could hear subtle footsteps slowly walking in the room right above me. My whole body felt like it went numb. I got up from the couch and went over to the stairs. I stood at the bottom and could hear a thumping sound resonating through the hallway. I called out my roommate's name. I knew it couldn't be him, but I was just hoping that somehow it was. After there was no reply, I started scaling the stairs and flicked on the lights to the upstairs hallway. It was empty, but the door on the far end was open. It was to my roommate's room, but I was 100% certain that I'd closed it the day he left, and I never went in there since, so there should be no reason it was open right now. My heart was pounding as I walked through the hallway and looked inside the room. It looked the same as it did when he left. Everything was clean and nothing was out of place. I then went around and checked every room upstairs and still found nothing. I didn't sleep that night and spent the next couple days on edge as I waited for my roommate to get home. I never heard those sounds after that night or had any doors randomly open like that. At this point, I don't know what the hell happened. Maybe someone found a way in and out without me knowing, or maybe it was something else. To this day, I still don't know. My name is Leo, and I work for a pizza shop in my small town. I don't do deliveries or anything, but I do mostly everything there is to do inside the shop. I make pizzas, organize the stations, clean, and get all the closing tasks done every night before I leave. My interactions with customers is usually pretty minimal, since we have a few high school kids to take orders and everything. But they're only scheduled until 11 on weekdays. The shop closes at 12:30, so any orders or customers that come in after that, I have to take care of. This was a regular Monday shift. Everything went smoothly for the most part, and at 11 my coworker left, so it was just me to close up. It's usually really slow, so I started the cleanup process. About a half hour before closing, a call came in. Praying it wasn't for a last-minute order, I picked up the phone. I said my generic "thanks for calling, how can I help you" line, and right after I finished, there was a quiet pause. Then they hung up. I put the phone down and said a few choice words, thinking it was a prank call from a couple immature kids. I went back to the kitchen where I was cleaning, but not even 30 seconds later, I heard the bell ring by the door. The timing was annoying, but I put everything back down and walked back to the front. A guy was now standing at the counter. He had a heavy coat on and a black beanie over his shaggy hair. His eyes were what really put me off though. He had dark circles and bags like he hadn't slept in days, yet his eyes were wide open. How can I help you?" I said, standing a couple feet from the counter. "I'd like to place an order right now." The way he said it was odd, and it very obviously told me that something was wrong with him. I said okay and asked what he wanted, but it almost seemed like he wasn't expecting me to say that. His eyes just continued to hold this disturbing stare at me as he struggled to respond. I looked away out of uncomfort, but my eyes fell on his hand that was partially out of his jacket pocket. He was holding a knife, like a typical kitchen knife. I think he was trying to hide it, but I could see the handle in his hand, and part of the blade was sticking out of his pocket. I felt my stomach drop and blood rush from my face, almost like I was gonna faint. I looked back up, and his eyes were still staring at me, but his face was stiff and emotionless. The sound of the door opening made both of us jump, and both of us looked over. It was some other random customer walking into the shop. and they immediately seemed to realize something was wrong. They stopped in place, stumbling over a few words, before the guy by the register suddenly walked past him and out the door. I used the phone to call 911 and tried to explain to the other customer what had happened. We also watched out the window as the guy got into his car and sped out of the parking lot. That was the last we saw of him, though. What I think happened was he parked outside the shop and watched in the window as he called us. Once he saw that it was me answering the phone, I guess he knew I was alone, so that's when he walked in. If not for the random customer walking inside in that moment, I don't know what would have happened. He was clearly insane and armed with a kitchen knife, so it couldn't have been good. Since then, I still haven't seen him come back, and I really hope I never do. I was 17 and living in my parents' basement. It wasn't a trashy basement or anything. It was probably similar to what would be considered an in-law suite. My parents traveled for work all the time, so I usually wouldn't be in the basement unless I was sleeping in the bedroom down there, or playing video games, or whatever. This was during one of my parents' work trips. I was alone for a whole week. This night was a Saturday, so I didn't have school, or really anything to do. I knew it was supposed to storm later in the day though, so before it was too late, I took my parents' car out to the store and got some food to make. While driving back, the storm rolled in. The roads weren't busy, thankfully, because even with the windshield wipers going at the fastest setting, it was still difficult to see. I pulled into the driveway and ran to the front door, getting inside and drying off. I then went straight to the kitchen and turned on the oven so I could make dinner. But almost right away, I heard something below me. It sounded like something falling over in the basement, like maybe a box or something. My first thought was that there might be a leak down there, and I got really worried about a possible flood, so I quickly went to the basement. I opened the door and flipped on the light, and as I walked down the steps, I didn't hear anything. No running water or any other sounds, and when I got to the bottom, everything looked okay. I walked through the main area where I had a small couch and TV set up, and then I went to the storage room. This was the only unfinished part of the basement, where we just stored a bunch of boxes and stuff. I opened the door and looked in. At first, it all looked normal, and I was actually really confused at what I could have heard. All the boxes were stacked up still, and nothing was on the ground. But after a quick walkthrough, I noticed something really strange. One of the boxes sitting on top of the stack was open, and when I looked inside, everything was scattered all over the place. It was full of old trophies that my parents kept, and almost all of them were broken. It looked like the box had fallen and broken everything inside, and then someone quickly tossed everything back in. I felt a surge run through my body as I just stared at that box, then realized what this meant. I looked up and started scanning the room. It felt like suddenly, all I could think about was how loud the storm was outside, making me unable to listen for anything, which only got me more panicked. I started to back up, and just as I did, one of the boxes in the back of the room was knocked onto the ground, and behind it, a guy came running right at me. I booked it for the stairs, and I have to say, there was nothing more terrifying than hearing his footsteps climbing the stairs just a few feet behind me. The fear really got to me, and on the last step, I slammed my foot on the stairs and fell straight on the ground. Every horrible scenario just rushed through my head in that moment. But when I turned around, the guy came up to the top of the staircase and immediately ran for the front door, running out of the house. I got up and locked it behind him, then called the cops. They found an unlocked window that he climbed in through, but as far as why he came into the home, there really isn't any answer. I was getting out of work late due to a recent security issue at our company that had everyone working overtime. I would usually take the train to and from work, but since I knew I'd be out past the train's running hours, I had to drive. It was nearly an hour to get home. As I was getting out of the city though, I saw that my gas was almost empty. I didn't remember it being this low before work, but I could have been too tired to have even noticed it. I knew there was a gas station by my house though, so I was just gonna fill it up there. But 10 minutes later, an alert came up on my dashboard that I was extremely low on fuel. It had gone down way more than it should have in such a short time, and within a minute, my car was stuttering and barely running. I pulled over, and just as I put it in park, the engine cut out. I tried to start it again, but it didn't budge. I was both worried and frustrated, like how the hell was this even happening? I took out my flashlight from the glove compartment and got out. The issue took less than 5 seconds to find. There was gas clearly leaking. I had no idea how this could even have happened, since everything was fine earlier. But before I could do much thinking, a truck pulled up behind me. Their headlights were off, and they parked unnervingly quickly, like there was no hesitation. I stood up and looked at their windshield, seeing a couple figures moving around in there. "I'm okay, guys. Don't need any help," I called out, but they didn't pay any attention. They kept moving around until one of the doors opened. A guy got out, while the others stayed in the truck. Ironically, he asked if I needed help as he started walking toward me. The way he said it was weird though, with a smirk and a strange tone to his voice. Again, I said I didn't need anything. He kept walking though, until he was right in front of me, standing uncomfortably close. "Why don't I give you a ride home? It's the least I could do," he said, giving a creepy, forced smile. I declined his offer and quickly got into my car. Disturbingly, he stood there for a while, like an entire minute, just looking at me through the window and not saying anything. I just looked forward and called the police for help with my car. But the whole time, I could see him in the corner of my eye, standing right outside my window and just staring at me. During the phone call though, he walked back to his truck. I watched in the mirror as he got in, then slowly drove past me. We made eye contact as he passed by, and for a brief moment, I saw someone in his back seat. They were pressed up against the window with wide open eyes, and although I couldn't get a good look at them, I knew something was wrong. I don't think that person was inside that truck willingly. When he drove off though, the license plate was missing. Police showed up and I told them everything. There was a bit of an investigation where they found my gas tank was stabbed purposefully by someone. Likely what happened was the guy planned the whole thing out, following me until my car broke down and hoping to get me to accept the ride. Whether that person was truly in danger, we don't know, because the man was never found. I was in Washington State, spending several days backpacking through the national parks. I was already about 20 miles out from the nearest road, and for the first 2 days, I hadn't run into a single person. It was the beginning of fall, so the weather was a bit colder than most people would be okay with, but I had all the necessary equipment. Anyway, in the morning, I got up and made a quick coffee over my pocket stove, then headed out to the next campsite. It was 6 miles out, which in the mountains is a pretty far hike. 4 hours into this walk though, I suddenly heard footsteps ahead of me. I looked up and saw a man walking along the trail, going the opposite way as me. I wasn't really expecting to see anyone, but I smiled and nodded as he passed by. But I noticed something really strange. He had no backpack, no water bottle, literally nothing. He was just wearing a long-sleeve t-shirt and some old hiking pants. I even turned around to get another look at him because I was so confused. When I did though, he happened to also glance back at me. So to keep things from being weird, I just turned back around and continued walking. After getting some distance, I kind of forgot about it. I think I came up with some idea that he had a campsite nearby and was just going for a walk. But I also knew that no established camps were anywhere near there. Whatever the case, I didn't find it worth thinking on too much. The next several hours were difficult, but eventually I made it to my campsite. It was empty, with just one small spot for my tent to go on. It wasn't as great as I was hoping though. The view was supposed to be a lot better, but from the actual campsite, there wasn't really any view at all. It was kind of covered up by all the trees. The whole campsite really just felt like it was in the middle of a forest, rather than on a mountaintop. I was rightfully exhausted though, and went straight away to setting up my tent, and then relaxing while watching the sunset. As I sat there, I randomly heard a shuffling sound behind me. I turned and was completely stunned to see that same man I'd run into earlier. He still had no backpack or anything, but even more confusing was why he was at this campsite. He was walking in the complete opposite direction when I last saw him, and for him to get here now, he must have turned around pretty soon after running into me. As he walked up to the campsite, he didn't look at me, like he was purposefully pretending that I wasn't there or that he couldn't see me. He went up to the other side of the small area we were in, and he sat down. No tent, no sleeping bag, no anything. Just sitting on the dirt and looking out into the forest. He was only 15 or so feet from me, but with him looking away, I was able to get a much better look at him. The man looked like he was in his late 30s and had a short scruffy beard with short brown hair. I couldn't help but feel really uneasy. Nothing about this was natural, and as the sun continued to set, it only made me feel even more unsafe. Who was this guy, and what the hell was he doing 25 miles out in the forest with no shelter or food or water? About 30 minutes passed, and he still didn't move. I decided though that I couldn't stay there. I had nowhere else to really go, but I figured I just had to find some random spot and make sure he didn't follow me. I began taking down my tent and packing up, and it was only then that the man looked over at me. And once he did, he never looked away. Every time I looked at him, he was staring right at me. Once I got everything stashed in my backpack, I saw in the corner of my eye that the man stood up. I began walking as fast as I could, hearing his footsteps following close behind me. I clutched my small knife tightly in my hands, unsure what was going to happen. After a minute, I looked back a few times, seeing him still following, but getting further away. Then I took a risk. I veered off the trail and into the woods. It was pitch black by now, so I hoped he didn't see me and would just keep walking. Once I was maybe 20 feet into the woods, I leaned out behind a tree and waited. 30 seconds later, his footsteps came down the trail, but just as he was about to pass by, he stopped. I watched his figure in the dark, looking around as if he knew I wasn't on the trail anymore. Then he started yelling. He was trying to sound friendly, too, which made it even more disturbing. After 2 minutes, though, he stopped yelling, but instead of going back to the campsite, he walked straight into the woods on the other side of the trail. His figure disappeared, and the woods fell silent. I must have waited there for over an hour before finally getting up and making my way back. I forced my body to push through and skip the next campsite just to be safe. When I was back in town, I put in a report with the local police office. They never followed up with me, though. I don't know if that man was living out there, or was trying to rob or kidnap people, or maybe even both, but I'm lucky to have gotten away when I did. I was working my regular 2 to 10 closing shift at a small drive-through cafe. It's a really small place with just 5 or so indoor seating tables, since most of our business is focused on the drive-through. This wasn't a busy spot though, especially during the later hours of the day. Being the only one working the closing shift, I'd usually sit at one of the dining tables and be on my phone, only getting up if someone came to the drive-through. It was drizzling outside this night, so it was even less busy than it already would have been. Past 7 o'clock, not a single customer came through for 2 hours straight. I was just sitting at a table watching Netflix on my phone when suddenly the front door opened. It kind of startled me, as nobody ever comes inside the shop this late. He seemed to not notice me sitting at the table though, because he walked up to a different table on the other end of the store and sat down with his back facing me. Something was definitely off about this guy though. He was very tall and wearing really dark clothing, and although it was only drizzling outside, he was soaked. Water was dripping from all over his clothes and onto the floor, and that got me thinking about how he even got here. No cars had pulled in, so he must have walked. Anyway, I stood up and walked over to the table, greeting him and asking what he wanted. He didn't smile or say hi back to me. He just sat there with a blank look on his face. I waited a few seconds before repeating myself, but he cut me off. He asked who else was working tonight. I was confused, but also slightly nervous about that question, but I still answered for some reason. It's just me, but we close in an hour. He then asked for a small coffee, so I walked back to the kitchen and started making it. I grabbed a cup, then poured it in, then turned to go back to the table when I saw him standing in the doorway to the kitchen. "Do you need something else?" He didn't respond. Now facing directly at me, I could see that his eyes were bloodshot, but his face was still blank, like no emotion whatsoever. It made me really uneasy. "Put the drink down and come with me." He was demanding it, and he looked ready to force me if I didn't. This guy was way bigger than me, so I really had no choice. I moved slow, trying to think of any way out of this as I followed him. As we left the store though, he grabbed the back collar of my shirt and pushed me across the parking lot toward the road. On the other side of this empty road was a completely wooded area with no buildings or houses as far as I knew, and that's exactly where he was leading me. Just as we were about to cross the road though, a single car came out and rolled past us. As it did, the man stopped, which forced me to stop, and both of us stared at the car and realized what it was. A police officer looking right back at us. I started screaming, and the guy immediately let go and sprinted across the road and into the woods. The officer pulled right into the parking lot and made sure I was okay, then called for backup. What's crazy is he wasn't even on his shift. He was actually heading home for the night and just happened to see us at the perfect time to save me. If he had even been 30 seconds earlier or later, I would have been dragged into those woods unseen and probably never made it out. Anyway, the cameras picked up some decent footage of him, but as of yet, still nothing has been found. I'll update if anything else happens, but I just hope he doesn't come back. This was just over 2 years ago. My name is Jake, and before this, I had no camping experience whatsoever. I really wanted to get into it though, and the only way to get into it is to go out and do it. So this was my first camping trip. I chose a campground 2 hours away from my city. It was one that seemed like it wouldn't be too crowded, but also I wouldn't be completely alone, which I thought would be ideal for my first time. I drove up there and arrived at the trailhead around noon, then hiked for another few hours before getting to the campground. There were a few park-style benches and a couple ground-mounted barbecue grills around the site. A few short trails split off and went to smaller campsites where some other people had tents set up. I went down one of these trails and put my things down, then spent the next hour getting my tent set up correctly and making sure everything was working properly. By then, a few people were in the middle area, using the grills and chatting. I'm not a super social guy, so I didn't feel comfortable inserting myself into the group. But a half hour later, the guy walked down to where I was set up and invited me to hang with them. It was a nice gesture, and he seemed cool enough, so I went with it. I followed him up and met a few of the others that were camping here. Everyone was cool, so I hung around for another hour, but after that some people split ways. I said goodnight to everyone and headed back to my tent as well. It was probably around 7, so just an hour left of sunlight, when TJ, the guy from earlier, came walking back to my tent. For reference, he was around my age, like mid to late 20s. When he came over, he asked if I'd ever been to this area before. I said no, and then he asked if I knew about the lake that was nearby. I said no again, and he immediately started telling me about this amazing hidden lake that nobody knew about, and how it was a super cool spot, and that he was gonna head there if I wanted to tag along. Again, it seemed like a friendly gesture, and honestly, I was super intrigued. I tossed my stuff back into my tent and left everything there, then followed him. He said it was a 10-ish minute walk through the woods, so we definitely had enough time before sunset. From the campsite, we followed this really thin footpath through the trees. It wasn't a defined trail at all, but it looks like it had at least been used a few times before. 10 minutes passed though, and there was no lake in sight. TJ also got weirdly quiet. Before he was very talkative and charismatic, and now he was suddenly giving one-word responses. He also kept looking out at the sunset, and while he could have just been trying to make sure we had time, something in me felt like he was doing the opposite, like he was waiting for the sun to go down. After 20 minutes of walking, I started putting some distance between us. I wasn't so sure anymore about what this was, but I could feel my adrenaline kicking in, so I guess my body knew. The sun was just barely lighting up thin rows of light through the trees, and it felt like the forest was so quiet all of a sudden. When I thought I had a chance, I turned and tried to quietly run back the way we came, but he immediately noticed. He called out once in a nicer tone, as if still in character as my friend, but then he quickly turned to frustrated yelling as I could hear him sprinting behind me. There was probably an entire minute of him yelling and chasing me through the woods before I could hear his steps slowing down. Then I heard a loud metallic thump right behind me. I looked back for a split second, seeing what looked like a knife ricocheting off a tree a few feet from me. I guess it was his last-ditch effort to stop me. After that, I lost him. I got back to the others and tried to tell them what happened, and one of them called the police for me. TJ, or whoever he was, never came back. In fact, everyone said he was already at the campsite when they got there, and after a bit of looking, he didn't even have a tent anywhere. He probably targeted me though, because I was alone, and he knew I hadn't had much hiking or camping experience. Thankfully, I didn't have to find out what he had intended for that night though, because if I had, I probably wouldn't be here. This was almost 2 years ago now. I was doing what I thought was going to be a regular vacation to where my parents live. I had rented an Airbnb for the first time, so I was really excited. The house was on a large plot of land and was very spacious and quiet. I lived in the city, so this was like luxury to me. I set everything in the room and pretty much left right away to see my family. I spent the whole afternoon with them before heading back to the Airbnb and making a quick snack, then hopping on the couch to watch a movie for the night. It was like 10 or 11, so pretty late, but in the middle of the movie, I heard someone walking outside the house. There was no mistaking that sound, and it just completely threw me off guard. I paused the movie and got off, quickly walking to the back of the house, looking out the back door. It was obviously dark out, but the guy was walking away from the house and toward the trees that were behind it. What's really creepy is that I never heard his footsteps approaching. Like he must have already been standing by the house for a while before I heard him leave. Once he was out of sight, I opened the back door and stepped outside. The back patio was empty, but along the house, there were clear shoe prints in the grass. I followed them, leading up to one of the windows, and when I looked through it, there was a direct line of sight to the couch I was sitting on. I got chills just thinking about that man staring into the house at me without me knowing. I quickly went back inside and covered up all the windows. For the next half hour, I sat in the living room and continued the movie with the volume on low. That way I could focus on listening if he came back. I didn't hear anything though. Once the movie was finished, I knew I had to get to bed, so I went back up to the window to do one last look to make sure everything was okay. I moved the curtains and saw nothing, but heard footsteps sprinting away from right outside the window. I hesitated before looking out and seeing that same guy running into the tree line. I immediately got my phone and called the police. Of course, by then, he was too far for them to find him, or even really search. However, while we were looking around the house, I noticed that my suitcase in the bedroom was open. It had clearly been searched through, and a few things were even missing. This probably happened while I was with my family, and the guy could have even been still in the house when I came back, only to sneak out of a window before I saw him. Why he came back afterward is what really disturbs me though. If I hadn't caught him watching me, there's a chance I would have gone right to bed, with him waiting right outside the window. Well, it was the fall of 2018 when this happened to me. I was 22, and at the time I was living temporarily on the East Coast, right outside of the Appalachian mountain range. I'll go ahead and admit that I've never been too much of an outdoorsy person and hadn't had any experience in camping or anything, nor was I really that interested in those sorts of activities. However, this was my last year living in probably the best place to do all those outdoor things. Plus, with it being mid-fall and the trees looking pretty and the weather being nice, I figured this was my chance to try it out. I didn't want to go for a huge camping adventure or anything, so I found a simple hiking trail instead that had some good views of the mountains. I prepped a small backpack with water, snacks, and a first aid kit. No cars were there, though it was just a small dirt parking area, so I guess it wasn't as popular as I thought. I parked and started walking. It was calm, and it definitely didn't feel like a path a lot of people would take. It didn't have any noticeable recent shoe prints in the dirt. There was just a fairly small path, with trees on either side. As I got further in, the entire path became more densely covered in trees, enough to block out a lot of the sun and make the whole trail shaded. It was actually really nice and cooling, but not hearing or seeing anyone else became more of an unsettling thought the further out I got. Not in a creepy way, but just that I was entirely alone. It wasn't something I was used to. About an hour, or maybe even 2 hours down the trail, I was caught off guard by seeing a man ahead of me. He was sitting on the side, looking like he was just taking a break under one of the trees. As I passed him, I gave a friendly nod and said hi, to which he looked up at me and said nothing. He didn't smile or nod. He just looked at me for a few seconds, and then I looked away. I wasn't sure what to make of it. Maybe he didn't hear me, or maybe I caught him off guard as well. But the strange look, without even a slight smile, was not giving me a good feeling. I walked a bit faster for the next part of the trail, hoping to put some distance between us. After an hour, I slowed down and made it to the end, which was an overlook of the mountains. The fall colors on the trees made the view way better than it probably would have been any other time of the year, and overall, I was glad to have made the hike. I stared off into the distance for a few minutes, enjoying a view that I almost never got to see. But when I turned around to leave, my heart almost left my body when I saw the man from earlier standing right at the end of the trail. He was maybe 10 feet from me, and I never heard him walking up. After the initial scare, I realized how creepy it was that he was just standing there and not coming up to look out the overlook like a normal person would be doing. But then he did something even more odd. His face shifted as he smiled and said hi, asking me how the view was. "Yeah, it's really nice. You should take a look too," I responded, trying to be polite but still really confused. The man stepped closer, then pointed to my right and said there was an even better view down that trail. I looked over my shoulder to where he was pointing. There was a path, barely visible, going through the dense trees. It was rugged and undefined, not something that looked to be used very often. The man walked up to where the path started and stood at the entrance, telling me again about how great the view was and saying it was just a minute or two to walk there. I politely declined, but he continued to tell me about how great it was, to the point where it was obvious that he had to have other intentions than just wanting me to go there and see a nice view. I said I was okay and had to get home, then started to walk toward the main trail, but the man was quick to move his body in front of it. I stopped in place, now even more terrified and thinking of the possible intentions of this man, who was just a few feet from me in the middle of an empty forest. The man looked at me with a blank expression. I took a few steps, walking around him and just hoping that nothing escalated. And for some miraculous reason, it didn't. The man watched me as I made my way around him and down the trail. Every time I looked back, he was still watching me, not even trying to be discreet. Thankfully, he didn't follow, and I made it back to my car. I don't know what that man was trying to do, but it was almost surely not anything good. What was down that path likely was just a dead end, somewhere for him to lead me before doing whatever horrible thing he had in mind. I don't know why he didn't stop me from leaving either. Maybe he was worried about doing something on the main trail. All I can say is that I'm lucky to have gotten out before something else happened. I was 16 last year, and me and my friend Leon were hanging out a few days before Halloween, talking about what we wanted to do. We felt too old to go trick-or-treating, but we also still wanted to do something and have some fun during the holiday. We thought up a few ideas, most being quickly discarded, but then I thought of something different. I reminded Leon of the abandoned farm that both of us had already known about and suggested we explore it. It would be creepy and thrilling, which was exactly what we wanted for Halloween. Also, compared to our other ideas, this one was the best by a long shot. Leon was excited about it too, but we both agreed that other people would probably have the same idea to go on October 31st. So instead, we chose to go on the night before. We didn't want to risk running into anyone crazy at an abandoned place like that. We just wanted to explore and maybe be a little bit spooked, then leave, which sounded harmless enough. On the 30th, Leon drove us out to the neighborhood it was by and parked on the road. Then we got out and walked through the neighborhood until we got to the street that turned into a gravel path. This was the driveway leading up to the farm. I'd only ever seen the place during the day, but it was pretty much just a large field of grass with the typical wooden barn and the single-story home. From the edge of the path, neither structure was visible. Our flashlights only lit up a few feet ahead as we started making our way down the gravel driveway. Once we started to get closer, we could see the outline of the barn on the left side and the house further back at the end of the driveway. We were more interested in the house, figuring the barn was probably completely empty and not very exciting. We kept walking and got to a clearing of the tall grass. It was like a circle of dirt and short grass that went around the perimeter of the house. As we approached the front, we passed by some large farming equipment. I don't know what they were, just some sort of old tractor-looking things that had been left out for years. Even with our dim flashlights, we could see that they were engulfed in rust. When we got up to the porch, it looked like the door had been replaced by a solid wooden board. We walked around the whole outside of the house, and every window and door was sealed and covered. Disappointed, we went back to the front of the house and tried to think of something else. As we stood there, we saw the path going up to the barn. It wasn't an actual path, it was more of just a line of flattened grass. With nothing else to do, we started heading for the barn. Something felt different as we approached it, compared to when we approached the house. It was just an uneasy feeling that grew as we got closer. When we reached it, the large door was already wide open. I walked in first and Leon followed behind, both shining our flashlights around as we entered. It only took a couple seconds for a horrid smell to hit us, though it was a barn, so it wasn't exactly surprising. But then we noticed something else. There were footprints all over the ground, but not what you'd expect from other kids exploring the place. They all went in a line, back and forth from a single point on the other side of the barn. I saw in Leon's eyes that he was just as freaked out as I was, but that was the goal of going there in the first place. We slowly walked in line with the footprints, leading to a wooden cellar hatch that was blended in with the floor. The only noticeable thing, other than the clear footsteps going up to it, was a shiny new padlock that held the hatch shut. Before we could really think about it, a sudden thud shook the whole barn. We turned around, seeing the door had been shut behind us. Leon sprinted over and shoved the door back open, and both of us looked around but didn't see anyone. Now terrified, we sprinted straight through the tall grass back to the gravel driveway, then booked it to the neighborhood where the car was. We definitely got the scare we were looking for, but maybe even too much so. Neither of us ever tried to figure out what really happened that night, but a couple months later, we saw that the whole house and barn had been blocked off. We tried to look up why, but there was no word publicly about it. What was going on there remains a mystery, but I think if we had stayed to find out, we may have never left. This happened last fall. It was toward the end of the season, closer to winter, and where I live it gets pretty cold and even snows sometimes in October. I've been doing food delivery for the past 3 years and was working on this night. It was around 10 p.m. and lightly snowing outside. It was one of the first snowfalls, so people must have been skittish to go out. I was one of few cars driving around, but a lot of orders were coming in. Pretty much as soon as I'd finish one, another one would pop up. After driving around everywhere until almost 1 a.m., I took up one last order. The snow was starting to pick up, and I was just getting a little tired. I drove through the McDonald's that they'd ordered from and picked up the food, then set in the directions to the house. It was close, about 10 minutes away, but I didn't consider the direction it was in before accepting the order. It was opposite from where I lived, and I was already a good 25 minutes from home, so it was going to be a long drive home afterward. Annoyed at myself, I turned out of the parking lot and onto the road. The plow trucks still weren't out yet, probably because they weren't expecting this much downfall, but my SUV was usually good in the snow, so I wasn't that nervous. While I was driving, I noticed the road I was heading down was about to leave the main area of town. I checked the map again, and it said it was this way, but it was just a very unusual route. I didn't even know any houses were down there, because the only reason people take the road is to get to the highway that leads out of state. I went down for a few minutes, seeing only streetlights and trees, until I came up to the turn. It was a single small street leading off the road. I slowed down, being more careful since the street was smaller and had trees lined up right beside it, so sliding off would make a really terrible night. As I made my way down, I saw a few long driveways leading to faint lights in the trees far out. Before I reached the driveway I was to turn down. It looks like all the others. I slowly drove through the driveway until I made it to the house. It was medium-sized and older, completely covered in snow. Nothing looked too notable about it. Really, the only interesting thing was that it was out here in the middle of some forest. I parked out front and got the bag, then started walking up to the door. The snow was thicker than I would have liked, soaking my shoes and even the lower legs of my pants. When I got up to the porch, I knocked and started to set the bag down, but almost immediately, the door swung open. I looked up, seeing a large man in a winter jacket. His face was pale, like he'd just been outside in the cold. "Hi, I got your order right here," I said, holding the bag up. After a moment, the man stepped back and opened the door wider. "You can set it down right over there." He lifted his arm and pointed toward what I assume was the kitchen. The way he said it made me feel like I had to, but I knew it was a horrible idea to go in there. I looked at the man's hands, seeing he wasn't holding anything, so it really didn't make any sense for me to do anything other than hand him the bag. "Sorry, but I really have to get going," I said nervously, holding the bag up again. The man's face dropped into a frown. Then he suddenly slammed the door shut. Still holding the bag up, and just a bit shocked by what was happening, I set it down on the porch and quickly started walking back to my car. But just as I got past the front yard, I heard something from behind me. I turned around, realizing it was from somewhere on the other side of the house. It could have been a back door or something, but was too muffled to hear clearly. Getting creeped out, I walked quicker and got in my car. I switched it on, and right as I looked up, I saw the man coming around the side of his house and making his way quickly over to my car. He had something in his hands. It almost looked like rope, but there was something else that I wasn't able to make out. I suddenly felt my heartbeat spike and adrenaline take over my body. I started going in reverse, trying my hardest to go quick while also not getting stuck in the snow. The man got close, probably just a few feet away, before my car was able to grip the road and start picking up some speed. I backed up through the whole driveway, seeing the man eventually stop and watch, slowly fading into the dark as I backed up into the street. I don't know what he was doing. Honestly, the whole thing was just terrifying and confusing, enough to make me not even want to think about it. I still do food deliveries, but I'm far more cautious, and most of the time, I don't even knock on the doors anymore. I just drop the food on the porch and leave. Had I stayed any longer that night, or had entered the house, who knows what would have happened to me.